Welcome to another episode of the .NET Show. In this episode, we're going to talk about Windows Server 2003, which should be shipping pretty quickly now. Specifically, I'm going to focus on IIS 6.0, which is the underlying architecture that allows web servers to function on top of Windows Server 2003, as well as ASP.NET and how it gains specific advantages from running on top of IIS 6.0. But before we get to that, let's check in with Erica in the news.
Hello, I'm Erica Wiechers. Welcome to the MSDN News Update. In February, MSDN launched a new media program titled MSDN TV. MSDN TV is a bi-weekly show that features useful technology tips and insights from the behind-the-scenes folks at Microsoft. MSDN's camera goes into the offices of real Microsoft employees who answer common customer questions and provide tips through code samples, discussions, and more. Check out the new show at msdn.microsoft.com/msdntv. Also in February, Microsoft released betas of Microsoft Windows XP peer-to-peer software development kit and enhancements to the Internet Protocol version 6, also known as IPv6 networking stack. With the SDK, developers can take advantage of new peer-to-peer infrastructure to create decentralized applications and services for business and consumer scenarios. The SDK includes updated Windows XP application programming interfaces for scalable peer-to-peer name resolution, efficient multi-point communication, creation and management of persistent peer-to-peer groups, and distributed data management. Enhancements to IPv6 include support for network address translation, traversal, and an IPv6 firewall to help protect IPv6-enabled machines. In early March, Microsoft released the first widely available beta version of its anticipated corporate server software technology for instant messaging and real-time collaboration, codenamed Greenwich. The Greenwich beta release delivers manageable enterprise instant messaging and an extensible platform that allows customers and partners to create new solutions and modify existing applications that incorporate presence or knowledge of whether a person is online and available, and IM functionality. Greenwich is slated for commercial release in mid-2003. This June 1st through 6th, Microsoft will host TechEd 2003 in Dallas, Texas. The conference will include over 350 sessions, hands-on labs, free betas, sample code, and partner solutions. Attendees will find extensive sessions on both infrastructure and developer topics, with content covering all of Microsoft's server and developer products. If you register by April 11th, you'll save $400. Be sure to check out the transcript for links to more information on these news items. And this has been the MSDN News Update. I'm Erica Wiechers.
Welcome back. With Windows Server 2003, there's a number of technologies there that help you make better applications more secure, more robust, more efficient. One of those technologies is IIS 6.0 and some of the things it enables for web servers and applications that rely on web servers to get their stuff done. Here with me to talk about web servers, IIS 6.0 and ASP.NET, I have Eric Deily and Rob Howard.
Hey.
Thanks for joining us.
You bet.
So Eric, what exactly do you do for Microsoft?
Well, so for the IIS 6 team, I'm a lead program manager. During the IIS 6 timeframe, was responsible for the architecture, designing some of the architecture components like recycling and application pools, as well as doing the release management for IIS through the XP timeframe. Right now, I own the debugging, monitoring, and troubleshooting side of things for IIS.
Okay. And Rob, what do you do?
I work on the ASP.NET team, which of course uses IIS as our web server. Specifically on the ASP.NET team, I work on something called session state, work on our error handling model, I work on a lot of the kind of plumbing and infrastructure pieces of ASP.NET. And I also get to work on a great feature of ASP.NET known as caching, something I think we're going to hear a little more about today.
Definitely. Now, when we think about Windows Server 2003, what do you think are some of the key tenets that we're being focused on for making sure that this product came out with?
As far as when I think of Windows Server 2003, I think of four main tenets. I think of security, I think of reliability, I think of manageability, and finally security or scalability and performance, really. Those are the big four for me.
Do you have any input, Rob? Or
Yeah, I agree. I've been most of my time thinking about next version of Windows with ASP.NET has been really about performance. So working with the IIS 6 team in particular on a lot of the performance characteristics and things we can do on our team to make ASP.NET perform better. Other members of my team have been focused more on the security aspects of ASP.NET, running in the next operating system, next version of Windows. But specifically, I've been working on performance. That's kind of been my key area I'm thinking about.
now, when I think about dealing with websites and web services stuff like that, I'm usually thinking about ASP.NET.
We would
and,
hope so.
What I can do with that, writing some of the pages, and it hasn't been for a long time that I've actually even thought much about IIS. I mean, I used to write some ISAPI filters and some ISAPI applications before ASP was really kind of a big thing to work on. But as soon as ASP came around, I said, hey, I'm just going to write stuff that looks like HTML that I kind of get my stuff done with. What is it that IIS is bringing to the picture here for a website developer, and specifically, what is IIS 6.0 adding to the previous versions?
Well, a lot of what you said was very valid about the previous versions, and that we now look to ASP.NET as our programming model per se, so that application developers, when they develop their applications, look to ASP.NET. IIS is the host for the ASP.NET applications themselves, and so with IIS 6, I look at it as we bring a stable, reliable, and secure platform to ASP.NET applications, improving much more so over IIS 5. And introducing a completely new application process model, introducing new security features like being locked down by default and not enabling every sort of application you can, that just because it's an application server. Those are the things that, in addition to also bringing a higher performance for those applications, we needed to make sure that ASP.NET applications ran much faster and we could deploy many more ASP.NET applications on IIS 6 than we could even on IIS 5. Those were our goals going into it.
Now, would it be fair to say that if you're comparing IIS to ASP, that IIS is kind of like the foundation that deals with the HTTP connectivity and the transports and some of the overall bigger concept, and then ASP is kind of this programming model that sits on top of that? Is that kind of a good way?
Basically, yeah. I mean, the IIS team looks at our role in the whole server and the whole web application server platform as being the infrastructure under which people can develop reliable applications and not have to worry about, well, gee, do I have to load balance this application because I'm not really sure that the platform itself is going to handle it. We view our role as just making sure the applications are reliable, secure, and can perform quickly without having to really take that into mind when you're developing those applications as much.
So, Rob, in being part of the ASP.NET team and running on top of IIS, what do you see that IIS 6 is bringing you that IIS 5 and previous versions maybe didn't quite bring to you?
So there's really two key things that IIS, at least from my point of view, really is doing for us as ASP.NET that really enables some really interesting new scenarios. The first is the process model. So in IIS 5, ASP.NET used its own process model, where we'd actually do a named pipe call from IIS 5 over to ASP.NET. ASP.NET would do its own work on the request, package up the response, send it back to IIS, and IIS would push it back out the door. Now in IIS 6 has its own process model. So I can actually have IIS 6 manage all my processes and not have to let ASP.NET itself do that. And IIS just has a bunch of more features. ASP.NET, for example, could only have one process per processor. So I had one process, I'm hosting all my applications in the same process space. The nice thing about IIS is I can go on one machine and I can go into each application and tell each application it's using its own process. That's just a huge win. It gives me some great fine-grained control over what my app is doing. So I know that if I do have an app that's possibly behaving badly, that's consuming too much memory, or it just becomes flaky after a certain point of time, I can take action just on that application.
I mean, it sounds like process management is something that belonged in IIS even to begin with. It wasn't something ASP.NET really should have been having to focus on. Is that?
I absolutely agree. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something we knew that IIS was going to build, and that we wanted to have something there for our customers as soon as we could, since we were building this new technology when we were building a new technology of ASP.NET. The second point, though, that we really love about IIS, and there's many, but I just really want to focus on two core ones. But the second one is this kernel mode caching feature. And I'm sure Eric's going to talk about that a little bit more, and I don't want to steal his thunder, but that is just, from our perspective, I do a lot of performance work on ASP.NET. We work with a lot of customers running our technology, obviously. I think that feature alone is just going to make such a big difference in the way customers perceive the performance kind of ratios of what they get out of ASP.NET and IIS together, and just also really make our apps just fly, frankly. I mean, the apps just cook now with IIS 6.
Okay, so on kernel mode caching, what exactly does that provide?
So the new architecture of IIS is built on, IIS itself is now built on a new kernel mode component called http.sys. And http.sys offers us a kernel mode cache, which is effectively a complete response cache. So what this amounts to is that in your ASP.NET application, if you set your output cache location equals server on your page, the entire response will be cached within http.sys, so that when the next request comes in for that actual URL, the response is served completely from the cache without ever transitioning to user mode at all.
So if you know that the page coming back hasn't changed, and so it doesn't have to have dynamic content coming through, you can take and still be generating that through an ASP page, but not having to require an ASP to be constantly fired up to run the code. Is that
Basically, it's just, think of it as the entire response that ASP.NET sends. If it marks it as cacheable, that entire buffer effectively is kept within the kernel. Right. Now, there's usual cache semantics like, how long it should live, and we'll time it out of the cache. Or if the worker process that was hosting or generated the response goes away, then that entry will be flushed as well. But the net effect is, if the application can tolerate having stale data for a certain period of time, take a stock quote, for example. Most of the stock quotes that we get today are delayed by at least 15 minutes anyways, right? Well, if people are commonly requesting Microsoft as a stock quote, you can go ahead and cache that entire response in the kernel. And the next, say, 1,000 requests that come in over the next 15 minutes will be served completely from the kernel without ever transitioning to ASP to regenerate, reparse, etc.
Or like news pages that are taking and they're updating their front page news articles maybe once an hour or something like that. They, we're just once an hour just taking pump it through.
Correct.
Yeah.
There's really all kinds of scenarios. I mean, the most common scenario I give to customers is you're building an expense reporting application. You're generating tables of data that come from databases that are really expensive to generate, and then where the data doesn't change that often. Now in ASP.NET today, I could take that content and output cache it and basically store it in memory and guarantee that on subsequent requests, IIS is going to call ASP.NET. ASP.NET is going to get the choice to say, based on the URL you're asking for, I'm going to fetch this out of memory if I have it, and then I can send the response back down. But with IIS 6, the extra benefit you get is that rather than IIS ever having even talked to us, the request can be pushed into IIS and it can be served straight from IIS. So you write this expense reporting application where you're generating all kinds of fancy reports that come from dynamic content from ASP.NET, from your database, knowing that that data doesn't change that often, maybe once every 30 minutes, once every 24 hours. And you can take a page that was doing about 30 requests per second and get 500-600 plus requests per second out of it easily. So it makes a huge difference.
Now, besides having efficiency of page loading and stuff like that, another question I know is on the tips of people's tongues is security. That seems the big buzzword these days. The previous episode was focused all on security. I'm assuming that IIS and ASP.NET have some security-focused capabilities that they're bringing to the table as well.
Certainly. One of the first things that we realized with the IIS-5 model was, with IIS-5, everything was turned on. So not only was ASP.NET enabled, but so were ASP, internet printing, anything else, any other ISAPI extension or CGI that you may have installed on the box or that came on the box for free were installed and enabled by default. And that's not usually the case with many customers who deploy either a specific ASP.NET web server or maybe just they only want to serve static content, for example, right? With IIS 6, the first step that we took was IIS isn't installed by default on Windows Server 2003.
So if I install Windows Server right now on a system, IIS isn't automatically there and running.
Do you want IIS in a web server on a domain controller, for example? Do you want it on an Exchange server?
No.
Right?
But I don't run a domain controller.
True. So that's where the whole concept of roles came in with Windows Server 2003. With Windows Server 2003, you install the application server role And when you install that role, you get IIS installed, you get ASP.NET installed, and then you get front page, and I believe there's one other, MSMQ is an option for that install, but it's not actually installed by default. So you get what amounts to an application server role installed. Instead of just, here's my server, and it has multiple roles, I now have the application server role installed, and it's ready to go when I install that role. After you install that role, then what it means is ASP.NET's installed and enabled, and ASP is enabled. But front page and the other ISAPI extensions on the box are not enabled. Internet printing, for example, is not enabled by default anymore. There's no need for it unless you explicitly go in and enable it. And that's where many of our security problems that we've had in the past have come up, is that people had these things enabled and they didn't even know about it.
Which I suppose, from a person running a system, it's probably easier for me if the stuff just automatically is there and running. So I write an ASP page and it just works right out of the box. But I mean, think, oh, I've got to go turn it on. But being easy also makes it easier for people to take advantage of things.
Correct. In fact, I guess it's almost like a paradigm shift in the way that we've thought of security. Instead of making it easier for applications to just work, right? We've made it so that the server is secure by default, and that's what we've heard from all of our customers. We gave them the option. Hey, look, do you want to install it and make it work? Does everything work off the fly? Or do you want to choose what kind of server you want this thing to be, and then enable what you need to as the functionality, as you add functionality to the server. And overwhelmingly, we heard the latter, which is, give me a secure server out of the box. We've also added things to it, to IIS 6, to make the applications themselves more secure, both in being able to isolate each application possibly in its own process, as well as making it so that the process identity of that process is not local system by default anymore. No longer do your applications actually run within the context of inet info or ASP.NET_WP. Now they run within a process called w3wp.exe. And that process itself can have an identity configured so that when we launch the process, we only launch it under that ID. So it can be launched in the local system, but actually by default it's launched under network service.
And that prevents it from getting access to things that it shouldn't have access to?
Correct. If somebody were able to hack the process, the base process identity itself is so low by default that it won't have access to things like command.com or any of the Windows System32 directories or any of that content at all.
What other sort of security aspects are important for IIS 6.0?
Well, beyond just the ability to isolate the applications and installing IIS itself, there are a number of other security protocols that we've added, such as the ability to integrate passport authentication, which ASP.NET has as well, so that you can integrate a passport ID and map that to, say, for example, an Active Directory user or group of users, and make it easier for things like single sign-on, right, where managing the identities themselves are fairly difficult to do sometimes.
Because I know in the past, if I wanted to take and have a secure page of some sort, it was a hassle to take and try to do all the user configuration and stuff like that and manage the usernames and passwords and stuff like that. And often I'd found other ways to get that information up there so it was secure out of obfuscation rather than anything else.
Yeah, security through obfuscation is not exactly the best way to do things.
Now, from a security standpoint, I know one of the things I hear an awful lot about is things called, buffer overruns. Is there anything in IIS 6.0 that specifically addresses that problem, or is that just purely just writing your code better?
I would assert that with IIS 6, it's not just IIS 6 that did it, it's the entire Windows organization as a whole. There are a number of tools that were used during the engineering process, the compiling of the code, the scanning of the source code, for example, to make it so that we were able to find the buffer overruns before we actually released the code, right? That being said, even if there happens to be a buffer overrun, the process itself is just running under a low privileged account. So that's part of the reason why we have that identity in the first place.
So both a combination of having the low settings of the low user settings on the account, as well as just making sure that the code is rock solid.
Correct.
Allows buffer overruns not to be a big
Correct.
problem.
We've got our own security team, testers whose sole purpose in life is to hack IIS and develop stress cases and tests that are designed to send abnormally formed requests, extend the buffer that would normally be allocated for like a 64K buffer for a URL I'll send 128K and see what happens, those sorts of things. Those testers are very sharp and are designed, and their sole purpose in life is to hack the product. We have stress variations that are designed just to abuse IIS in the worst way, and we fix every one of those bugs.
Well, what about robustness then? A lot of times, we have applications running, problems occur, they crash, installing new updates and stuff like that. All these things just are problematic from one standpoint to another. How does IIS 6.0 deal with robustness?
Well, when I think about robustness, I think of the fact that one of the goals, at least when I look at ASP.NET, I look at ASP.NET as enabling application developers to deploy rich applications very quickly, right? And in doing so, we've built the platform itself so that we can tolerate any sort of possible issues with those applications or any other applications. For example, ASP developers. Many ASP developers wrote COM objects that just went buggy, right? And they would hang. And in the end, we've built a lot of robustness into the exact process model. That's one of the reasons why we have that new process model in the first place. This process model allows you, as Rob had said before, to isolate your application into its own process so that A, it's robust in that it doesn't affect other applications if there is a failure, and B, if it does crash, we detect that crash and start up a new process in its place while we queue requests within HTTP.sys for that application. So the net effect to the customer is, to the user, they don't see a hiccup in the service. Their globe continues to spin, the connection succeeds, and their request is queued, and it acts as if nothing ever happened. We also have things like recycling, for example, that were basically introduced with ASP.NET in their first release, but taking that next step further in IIS 6, where we have the ability to recycle each one of these individual applications or application pools.
What does that mean exactly?
Think of recycling as us stopping the old process and allowing it to drain its requests and starting a new one up in its place while it's draining those requests. So effectively, we reload that application code in a separate process. If it leaks memory, for example, we can recycle it, stop the old process, let it drain, and start a new process up to handle the new requests, instead of requiring that the application developer fix every code, every bit of code. A lot of times they're mission-critical applications which can't tolerate being taken offline, for example. And in this case, that's what recycling's there for, right?
So with memory leaks, is IIS 6.0 noticing memory leaks automatically in doing this, or does it require the admin to take and realize memory's being leaked and then stop it and restart it?
It's a setting actually for IIS. So when you configure what's called an application pool, and you put your applications in that pool, one of the configurations that you can choose is recycle this based on using, say, 200 megs of memory, of actual memory. And when we do periodic checks to verify that the process if the process uses that much memory and eclipses that mark, we'll shut it down and initiate start up a new one. And that's what we call the recycle. And there are other reasons why you can recycle your application as well. A lot of times what we found is customers initiate what in IIS 5 was a standard practice, which is IIS resetting the service every day, every week, for example, right? And IIS reset is a fairly heavy hammer. IIS reset is effectively tearing down every TCP connection that you have and restarting the service. Now with recycling, the difference here is the connections are still persisted. The requests are still queued. All we're doing is actually recycling the process, the host process for that application, and starting a new one up in its place. So we can recycle now. We offer the ability to do a schedule-based recycle, which is recycle it at 2 o'clock in the morning when I have no load, right? Or recycle it after a certain number of requests have been received, or based on the memory that we discussed before. Alternatively, if an administrator notices that there's a problem, they can walk up to the server itself and using the MMC or a script, for example, and recycle an application pool on demand instead of having to wait for that recycle to kick in.
So essentially allowing the applications themselves to take and automatically migrate from one state to another as problems happen in one thing, then the user is constantly accessing that. They don't notice any difference, but suddenly they're now using a new process.
Correct. And one of the things that is important to realize with that, though, is with recycle, the session state can be lost if it's stored in proc. One of the things that ASP.NET offers, and I'm sure Rob can elaborate on a bit more, is the persisted session state service that allows you to store the session state externally.
Plus, I mean, the whole concept of stateless web pages, stuff like that is fairly important, and they wouldn't have to worry about that from that standpoint. Then.
If the application is stateless, you bet.
Right. Because then that's one of the things we're always pushing on people. Web applications should, if they possibly can, be stateless, so they're not maintaining that state across requests.
Correct. There's another thing that we actually do to help improve the robustness of the applications as well, and that is that each one of the worker processes is multi-threaded, but it's possible for those threads to become blocked, right? And in doing so, we do what's called a ping, and it's roughly analogous to a TCP ping. We send a message across a name pipe to each process, and we expect a response back in a certain period of time to indicate that it's healthy and that it has at least one thread to do work, pull new requests, send requests up to ASP.NET, what have you. The cool thing is that if it doesn't reply back in that time period, we determine that it's ill and recycle that process. We kill the old one and we start a new one up in its place, right? The other thing that's important to realize is that ASP and ASP.NET both build on top of this ping. They effectively piggyback off this ping in their ability to report themselves as unhealthy, because both ASP and ASP.NET both have their own thread pools as well. And if those thread pools become blocked, right, it's possible then for ASP.NET to report itself as unhealthy and initiate a recycle because the ASP.NET infrastructure doesn't have enough threads to do work, for example.
So it sounds like that ASP.NET and IIS 6.0 really work really well together in making sure that the application developer has a secure, robust, scalable solution they can put through on things.
Oh, yeah.
Now, we've heard an awful lot about IIS 6.0, and Rob, what about ASP.NET? How does it deal with some of these things like security and robustness?
Sure. Well, with regard to robustness, I think we're really, in IIS 6, when you're running ASP.NET 1.1 and in IIS 6, we are really relying on IIS for all those type of robustness features. So things like process model recycling, all those kind of aspects that we used to have in our worker process in ASP.NET 1.0, we're now taking advantage of in ASP.NET 1.1 on IIS 6. From the security point of view, again, we're really relying on everything that IIS 6.0 does with regard to the identity of the process, what the process can or cannot do. But there's some things that we've specifically done in ASP.NET 1.1 that I think are worth calling out, that are kind of apart from IIS, that really affect the way developers build applications now. Those three things are one, code access security, two, encrypted configuration, and the third, which is something called request validation. And a common kind of problem we've seen on the web today is requests come in through IIS, they come to ASP.NET, they come to ASP, wherever else, and you essentially get a form back, and you can type values into that form and hit submit. And one of the kind of problems on the web has always been cross-site scripting attacks, where the form comes in, I can type in some code, not code rather, but maybe some code, maybe some script code, maybe some HTML, and with the expectation that I, as a hacker, can enter this stuff in, submit it back to your server, and that it goes somewhere into your database or somewhere else where you're storing this data. And later you request that a page or another kind of application resource that accesses that data, pulls it in to dynamically display the content, and what you wind up getting is a page that has graffiti on it because it has HTML markup in it, or it has a little script that pops up. And we actually had one of those. We run the ASP.NET website, and one of the things when we released our forums applications, we said, hey, everyone come on in and try to find some cross-site scripting attacks. And quite a few were found. Like people would have some in their signatures on their posts, and the pop-ups that say, I'm the .NET programming god or something. So those are really what cross-site scripting attacks are. You allow some type of content to come into the body of your message that you're generating that really shouldn't be there. So what we're getting to is that we've implemented a feature in ASP.NET called request validation. And our hope with that is it prevents cross-site scripting attacks. So when a request comes in, we get to, everything else looks fine. It passes through IIS, it gets to ASP.NET. User types in some script content, like some JavaScript or some HTML. They try to post it back to the server. And in ASP.NET 1.1, running on top of IIS 6, the default behavior at that point is going to be an exception. We're going to throw an exception, say, sorry, the contents of this message contain markup that you're attempting to post to the server. If you'd like to turn off this feature, here's how you do it. And essentially, it's a preventative measure to really force developers to consciously make the decision that I do, in fact, want HTML content to be pasted in this text box and to be sent back to my server, and I'm going to consciously go turn off this feature so that I can process that information. So that's one of the things we've done. The second thing we've done with regard to security, we really don't, we've done a lot, but the three key areas again, and the second one is encrypting configuration. Within our configuration system, it's really easy to configure your app with ASP.NET. One of the things we kind of designed out of the box, really for. But with this XML-based configuration file, there's the opportunity to store information there that possibly shouldn't really be inside of a plain text XML file. So for example, like you can store information about if you want to do some impersonation perhaps. You can store credentials for how you connect to your out-of-process session state store. And this is probably information that you want everyone seeing. So we got a lot of feedback from customers saying, you know, I love this XML-based configuration file, but I really don't like the fact that I have all my information is in clear text. So for certain aspects of your configuration file, we now support a way to encrypt that information so that you can run a tool over your config file. We can encrypt some of those parts of the data and store the key in the registry, so that if someone does compromise your system and get your configuration file, they can't actually do anything with it because all the content that they need to access is encrypted. We don't encrypt everything, just those specific aspects. And really the other kind of last thing we've done with security, last big major thing is something known as code access security. This is a feature that we had in the 1.0 version, but it's one of those things we kind of pulled back on a little bit as we're getting ready to ship, and now we got to put it back in the 1.1 version. And what code access security is a way of sandboxing applications. So even when I'm running on IIS 6 and I'm using this network service account as my identity, you know, I might allow that account to do some things like get access to a database, perhaps, so I can do integrated authentication against the database, kind of a lot of different privileges. And what code access security does is it's a way of saying on an application by application basis, I can come in and say this application is not allowed to get access to the network. This application is, what's another good example, is not allowed to do debugging. This application is not allowed to access the file system. So there's a lot of different controls. You know, really, if you look at the application model with IIS 6 and ASP.NET together, we're really giving developers and administrators a lot of powerful tools to really lock down their systems, take more control over what's happening, and then slowly kind of turn up the knobs for kind of the settings they want to have exposed to their application developers.
Which, I mean, I think is exceedingly important. I mean, it might be a hassle for the administrators of the systems. It's not quite as easy as just, you know, sticking the disk, turn it on, and everything is going. But I think in this day of the security problems we have, we need to pay more attention to that sort of stuff.
Absolutely.
Now, let's say I'm a developer and I'm currently using Windows Server 2000 and ASP and ASP.NET 1.0, and I want to take an upgrade to Windows Server 2003 and start taking advantage of some of the capabilities, the efficiencies and robustness that Windows Server 2003 provides. What do I need to do? I mean, how much work was it going to require out of me in order to allow my site to actually take advantage of some of these features?
Certainly. There are a couple of avenues you could take. The first avenue, which is the recommended one, is to do a clean install if you can. So you do a clean install and you install your application server role, as we discussed before. So you have IIS 6 installed and you have ASP.NET enabled, but that's about it really. The first step is then to migrate your application over. With ASP.NET, you can simply just X-copy that application over and create a new virtual directory for it. You could create another application pool for that application, but by default, it will run in the default application pool, which is installed with IIS 6. The next step would be just to test that application and make sure that it can run as network service, that it doesn't require any other additional privileges, that ASP.NET is running perfectly within that process, and that your application can support load through a recycle, for example. We want to encourage developers to develop their applications in such a way that they can persist their state through, or that they can operate through a recycle. We keep, the mantra here is design your app to be recycled, right? The administrator will more often than not decide to recycle periodically instead of taking the box out of rotation, for example. It's much easier for them to do that. They don't lose server availability at all, and so they'll recycle the application, right? And that's why we want to encourage developers, just test it through a recycle. And it's pretty easy to do. You have your application, you send in a couple of requests. Let's say it's the grocery to go sample application, right? You build up your shopping cart, you send in a couple of requests, and then you go to the MMC and you initiate a recycle on that application pool. Send in another request, and if your shopping cart's gone, Well, you didn't persist your session state through a recycle, for example. Those are the sorts of things that we really want to, make sure developers are aware of. That's pretty much the initial testing point, really.
What about you, Rob? What about, if I'm an ASP.NET developer, are there things I need to take advantage of to use some of the new features that IIS 6.0 gives you?
Absolutely. There's actually a couple different aspects. The first is that, like I said, with ASP.NET 1.1, which is what comes with Windows Server 2003, we do have that request validation feature enabled. So that's something just to really be aware of. So when you do migrate your app to IIS 6, ASP.NET 1.1, just to really go through it and test it all again, test all your post-back scenarios, make sure you don't run into this exception, because you do have to actually go in and disable it for those pages. That's one thing to look for. But the other thing to really look for is just to where you can take advantage of some of the caching features that ASP.NET offers. Looking at your pages, trying to figure out which pages don't need to be re-executed on each request, and trying to enable output caching of those features. Because just by the simple step of enabling this output caching feature in ASP.NET, you automatically pick up the behavior that IIS 6 gives you with the kernel mode caching.
Not only does it help you with your actual response throughput, but it also lowers your CPU usage as well. We've seen at a couple of customer sites that while the server's under load and they're not using the cache, their CPU usage is much higher than when they enable this output caching and they start serving the responses straight from the cache. At that point, their CPU load drops tremendously, and it allows them to deploy many more applications on that box, to consolidate applications where previously that wasn't possible.
And it sounds like to a certain extent, a lot of the things you've talked about taking advantage of IIS 6 and ASP.NET, there's not really stuff I have to do to take advantage of it. It's just stuff I need to kind of pay attention to, make sure I'm doing proper testing to make sure things are working properly, other than doing the output caching mechanism sort of stuff. And just by running Windows Server 2003, I'm gonna probably see some better efficiencies.
Certainly.
Okay.
Not only better efficiencies, but increased reliability on the server itself. I mean, with the ability now that you can isolate the applications in their own process, you can actually, this is actual isolation of that application. It's not running through init.info and going off to some other process. It's going straight from the kernel, right, from the TCP stack to the http.sys and up to the worker process. It's not going through some intermediary user mode process at all. So in that way, another misbehaving application, which is not, let's say I develop an application, I put it on the server, it's running its own application pool. But if there's another misbehaving application, I'm not affected by that misbehaving application.
Which is important.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Now, Windows Server 2003 will be coming out right about the same time this episode's going to be on air. What sort of customer feedback have we been getting already about what their feedback is on Windows 2003 and IIS?
Just about every one of our JDP customers and beta customers has been immensely impressed with the server itself. I mean, we've told them before that it's a complete rewrite of the W3 service to make it more reliable, and they love it. Many of our customers have actually started thinking about consolidation stories now, that they can consolidate where they would have had one server for an application. They can now have one server for many applications and have them work reliably and still maintain the same performance that they had before, or even more so. So we've been getting great feedback from our customers, especially those that are using ASP.NET on IIS 6, in that they can isolate their applications reliably. They can have them improve their performance by using the the HTTP.sys cache. It's just mind-numbing how wonderful we've gotten good feedback from these people.
That's good. So before we cut over to the programming segment, are there any final words you want to give our audience about understanding better the architecture and overall objectives we had with Windows Server 2003 and specifically IIS 6.0 and ASP.NET 1.1?
The first thing I would recommend is that there are some white papers available on the Microsoft.com website for Windows Server 2003. Specifically, there's one that talks about the new architecture, many of the new features that we've added, right, including how ASP.NET plugs into those features. I would encourage people to go to the website and read that white paper. It's about a 30-page white paper, equivalent to about a 200-level tech ed talk.
Okay. And you, Rob, any final comments?
Yeah, we definitely have some stuff on MSDN, and I can send you links for that as well, about some of the new features that we have inside of ASP.NET for ASP.NET 1.1.
Okay. So you guys ready to do some programming now?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Definitely.
So stay tuned, and when we return, Rob and Eric will show us some aspects of programming using ASP.NET and IIS 6.0 on Windows Server 2003.
Hi, Sally. It's Brent. Can you leave a message for Bruce that I'm not coming in today? I'm sick. What? Bad sushi? Oh, I gotta go. I gotta go.
Welcome back. Now, in this segment of the show, I want to take and show you some of the programming aspects associated with IIS 6.0 and ASP.NET, how some of these capabilities that they've added to those systems can assist you in writing better applications, and show you how to actually implement those things in your applications as well as on your server administration. Again, to join me, I have Rob Howard and Eric Daly. Thanks. Good for joining me again. Now, I understand you've got some demos you've worked up to help us understand better what's going on here with the system.
Certainly. We've got 4 main demos that Rob and I will be doing. The first of which is to hit on the issue that I talked about before, which is application functionality that's enabled or disabled by default on the server. When IIS, like I said, when IIS is installed, ASP.NET as part of the application server role is enabled. But I want to show you what happens when it's disabled and what you can expect and how you can troubleshoot that sort of thing from an application server admin perspective.
Okay, sure.
So what we have here is our grocery-to-go application.
And this is a sample app that ships with the SDK or something like that, or?
Correct. I believe.
Yeah, it shipped with the SDK. I think it shipped with the 1.0 SDK.
Okay.
So I just refreshed the application, and if you zoom in on the process details part of this application, you'll see that it's currently running in the default application pool with a process ID of 3172. Now I'm going to go ahead and use the MMC, and I'm going to drop down to my web service extensions folder. This is a new folder here, and this is where you will enable and disable functionality. Right here you can see ASP.NET is allowed, but if it's prohibited, and it'll tell me that there are ASP.NET applications depending upon this, what I'll do is I'll go back to my application and I'll refresh it, and I get a very generic 404 message back. The reason why we chose a 404 message is to basically put hackers off the chase. We don't want people to be able to figure out if the content's there or if it's just not enabled or not. Now, the way that you can disable, the way that you can actually troubleshoot this is to look in your log files. Your W3C log files will now log a substatus code. So you'll see a 404 and a substatus code of 2 that will tell you that this request was disabled because the ISAPI that it was trying to invoke was disabled.
So essentially, this is the experience I get if I was currently running Windows Server 2000 and had this application running on a upgraded to Windows Server 2003, it would automatically turn off by default IIS 6.0 and ASP.NET, and this is the response.
Well, actually, you wouldn't even see this if you didn't install IIS by default. When you installed IIS.
Yeah, right. So if I just installed Windows Server 2003, IIS wouldn't be there, ASP wouldn't be there, and this is the response I'd get.
Correct. Well, you would get a TCP failure when you install IIS and ASP.NET's not installed, or ASP.NET is not enabled. You'll get this.
Right. Okay.
So, Rob will demonstrate now some of the performance aspects.
Absolutely.
Of it. But first, let's re-enable it.
Let's re-enable it.
Otherwise, the demos won't go anywhere.
Okay, so just to make sure we're all working, and I'll just hit F5 on the page. Sure enough, we're back to Grocer to Go. So what we're going to look at here is just some of the performance characteristics of ASP.NET running on top of IIS 6. And I'm just going to switch over here to Visual Studio.NET and just kind of scroll through some of this code. We're not really going to talk about it all. I just want you to get to understand there's actually some stuff happening here. So as I scroll through here, you can see this is the page is generating that main Grocer to Go window or view. And you can see there's some stuff happening here. Here's where I'm getting the process statistics that Eric was showing just a second ago and populating those. Here's where I'm getting all the category information. So I'm obviously calling through a a data access layer to get that, and a business logic layer. Here's a click event handler for adding things to my shopping cart, where I'm using the session state object to store my shopping cart. And there's just some other stuff happening in here. And then if we scroll a little further down, there's just the HTML output. Pretty standard stuff.
Looks like just standard ASP.NET code.
Yeah, standard ASP.NET code. And then we've got another component over here called market.vb. It's our business logic layer. This just has a class in here called inventory DB for talking to my inventory database. It also has a function for getting a product, as well as getting the calories per product, as well as all the classes used by my shopping cart, such as order item and order list. So as you can tell, there's not a whole lot of code, but it's a pretty good snapshot of what an application looks like. And what I thought we'd do now is use another tool that Visual Studio.NET Enterprise Edition ships with. It's also a free download from MSDN, but it's called Application Center Test. And I just love this tool, mainly because it has a graphical display of how many requests per second your app is doing. So what I've done is I already have Application Center Test open, and I've gone ahead and created a test already. Creating a test with Application Center Test is super easy. You can just say record new test. It pops open a browser window. You type in the URL you want to stress test, and it captures that and writes a script for you. So it's all automated. So all I have to do now is I can take my grocer to go test that I've written, right click on it, and say start test. Now what this is going to do, this is going to start sending, it's going to create clients, local clients on this laptop, and start sending requests against IIS and ASP.NET.
So it's simulating if you had other clients out there on the web someplace that were hitting your server.
It's simulating load against the server. And running the same page on Windows 2000, let's say, and ASP.NET 1.0, we weren't getting quite as good as performance as we are on this particular version of it, on IIS 6 and ASP.NET 1.1. We're ranging anywhere from about 400 to 430 requests per second. Right now we're about 469. And that's really good. That's not output caching. That's not taking advantage of the kernel mode cache. That's just executing raw requests.
So this is a site that probably hasn't been changed at all since
Right.
IIS 5.0 and ASP.NET 1.0. You're just running it now on Windows Server 2003, and you're automatically seeing performance gains. Now, just for the audience, what would the performance probably have been on Server 2000?
Hard to say. I would imagine it'd probably be around 400 or less.
Okay.
Probably a little bit less than that even. I haven't really run those benchmarks.
Okay, so we're probably seeing like a 20% increase in speed then.
Roughly. But what I thought I'd do, this is just a laptop. Unfortunately, I don't have a bunch of other machines to do my stress testing work. So this machine is both having to do the web server requests and the stressing of the web server on the same machine. And if we look at my Windows Task Manager, you can see my process is just pegged at 100%. So it's really working right now. And it's shoveling out those requests pretty fast. So what I thought I would do, just to kind of simulate some more work that's happening in the page, is I would go grab, do a little trick over here, go back to Visual Studio.NET, and I'm going to add a little statement in here that says thread sleep. So what I'm saying is, on every page load event, I'm going to have this page sleep for 50 milliseconds, just so I can simulate some other expensive operation that might be happening within the page. So when we flip back to our graph, we can see that dropped our performance. Not significantly. I mean, we went from about 450 requests per second. Now we're averaging about 200 requests per second. Still pretty good performance. So now let's say I've got this app that's doing some complex work. I'm pretty happy with the request per second. But now I also notice there's some opportunity here for output caching. So let's go ahead and enable the output caching feature. So all I'm going to do is copy this statement into the top of my page. It says output cache. We'll set it for a duration of 60 seconds, saying you can cache this page and hold on to it in memory for 60 seconds. Don't vary by any parameters. So we have this feature in ASP.NET that says when requests come in and they have different parameters, we can actually vary entries in the cache. What I'm saying now is just don't worry about that. And then specifying that only the local server can actually cache this request. So only ASP.NET can cache it.
So this is just a simple ASP statement you're sticking at the top of the page that's doing a directive that's saying, hey, for this page, set this up.
Yep.
One line of code, nothing fancy at all.
One line of code, nothing fancy at all. And this is not new with IIS 6 and ASP.NET 1.1. This is something that we had out of the box with ASP.NET 1.0.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do now is just hit file save on this guy. What's going to happen in our little stress tester is we should see a little cost early on for recompiling the page, and then we'll start serving it out of the cache. And as you can see, the performance it should stabilize again at about 500 or so requests per second with output caching enabled. Right now we're at about 600. So you can see that output caching makes a huge difference in the performance.
So it's more than 100% increase then.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Just in output caching.
And I can actually do some other kind of fun things here, one of which is, duration of 60 seconds. Right now it's caching the entire page for an entire minute. Well, let's just bump this down to, let's say, 2 seconds. So every 2 seconds, this page is dynamically being re-executed. And even executing the page every 2 seconds, we'll actually see, we'll see a slight drop in performance. Like we went from averaging about 600, we should tail out around 550 or so now. So even executing this page every 2 seconds, we're still getting a huge win in performance.
Definitely.
Now we can even go one step further, if you can believe that. We can go in and, so the default way that most people use the output cache directive in their pages is they don't specify location equals server. That's something I did to make sure that IIS wouldn't get an opportunity to cache it. So I actually delete that and hit file save again on the page. And let's just bump this duration back up to 60 seconds again. And now, since this is running in IIS 6, IIS 6 has the opportunity to serve the page from its kernel mode cache as well. And the only kind of downside about my demo here, oops, I ran out of time. Let me start it over again. The only downside about my demo is IIS 6 can send the pages back to me so fast that my laptop can't generate enough load for IIS 6 to max itself out. So if we again go back to my Windows Task Manager, you'll see I've got IIS 6 enabled, or I've got kernel mode caching enabled here, and basically my CPU is pegged at 100% because my client that is running and trying to hit this machine is just cycling so fast that it's consuming all the CPU, and IIS is hardly working. It's just sending things straight out of memory.
Well, to be precise, IIS isn't working at all. It's HTTP.sys. It's just sending out the responses completely from the cache. So IIS and ASP.NET never have to worry about the request. They never see it. They never have to allocate memory. They never have to load the ISAPI. They don't have to do anything.
So it sounds to me like you probably just need to beef your laptop, and then maybe you can show this to get that guy really sweating.
Yeah, I do. One of the things I got to do on the ASP.NET team is I get to work with our. I kind of manage the performance of ASP.NET and help try to drive through getting better and better performance out of ASP.NET. And one of the things that our dev team and our test team with regard to performance are always coming back to us with is we need more hardware. We're trying to do stress testing on IIS, and it's just so darn fast we can't generate enough load to really get a good, accurate picture of what's actually happening. So it's just really impressive how fast you can kick out those pages. So taking advantage of a simple feature like this, output caching, just is a fantastic way just to dramatically increase the perf of your application, even when you're doing complex operations within your app.
And now this little tool you're running here, this is something that comes with IIS 6.0?
No, this comes with Visual Studio. It ships with Visual Studio .NET Enterprise Edition. So if you install Visual Studio .NET Enterprise Edition, you'll have it by default. It's also a free tool, so you can go up to MSDN and search for Application Center Test, and there's a free download there. And I'll try and send you a link afterwards of where you can download that from. This is a fantastic little tool. Okay, cool.
So previously, when we were talking before in the first segment, we were talking about how you can isolate applications into their own application pool. And it doesn't take any sort of code that you have to change at all. And what I want to show you is how easy that is to do. So right now, we're still running in default application pool, process 3172. All I have to do to go to the MMC, one of the new features that we've added is the ability to duplicate an application pool configuration and save it to disk as an XML file. So I'm going to save this configuration file to disk, and I'm going to call it net show pool. And it will be saved.
Desktop.
Yep. Oh, we're going to replace this one, and we're going to call it 2. There we go. Now let's go to our desktop real quick. And the cool thing is
There's
that
a little button down here that has been
he got rid of it.
Oh,
The cool thing is
I always use Window M.
that we can edit this since it's just XML. We now store the metabase in XML, and we have the ability to export any node in XML, any node to XML. So the reason why this is important for a .NET developer is that ASP.NET allows you to do Xcopy deployment, but there's certain parts of configuration that still reside within IIS, like the application pool, like the virtual directory configuration. And the way you can do that and still get virtual Xcopy deployment with IIS is you export that node to XML. You keep that file along with your application, and then you Xcopy that and use the tools built into IIS, such as a new command line tool called iisconfig.vbs to import that node. Or you can use the UI, which I'll show here. So let's change the name of this application pool, and we'll call it net show pool. And we'll just save this real quick. And now we'll go back to the MMC. And it's very easy for us to just do a new application pool from file. We'll go ahead and browse and find, here's net show pool 2. Read that file in. And there's my newly defined application pool. I hit OK, and it shows up in the MMC, ready for use. Now the way I isolate my application now is I come down to the virtual directory. I find the properties, and where previously in IIS-5 you would have seen the isolation mode, low, medium, or high. In IIS-6, now you choose the application pool. So we just imported this from an XML file. I'm going to go ahead and apply it and shift back over to my application and refresh it. And then now the URL is being directed to the new application pool. We spun up a new worker process for that application pool. And you can see it's now running a net show pool under process ID 4036. I didn't have to stop and restart the service. I could just isolate my applications quickly and easily without having to have any real impact on the application itself. It's pretty cool.
and one of the benefits of what I was noticing there was that you've now got these individually named application pools that you manage by name. And so each different application running on your system, you can take it easily, push those into a separate section and better access what access they're going to have rights to, what priorities they're going to be running at, and stuff like that.
Correct. In fact, to add to that, there's another tool that's being built and released for Windows Server 2000, Data Center Server 2003, and Enterprise Server 2003 that will allow you to enforce a CPU priority on each one of these application pools by name, so that you can ensure that your mission critical application has access to 30% of the CPU, so that if there's a misbehaving application, that your mission critical application is guaranteed that if that misbehaving application is chewing up CPU, that it gets 30% of the CPU regardless.
Cool.
All right. So one of the things that Eric just showed was changing the process and the application pool that the app was running in. And one of the things that I had mentioned earlier while we were kind of scrolling through the code is this app uses session state. And something that we had even mentioned even earlier was that you really want to design your apps to take advantage of the fact that IIS does proactively or can proactively recycle your app. So one of the things that this app needs to do right now is it needs to be changed slightly so it can support what we call out-of-process session state in ASP.NET. So let's go add a couple things to my shopping cart. We'll add that milk. I'll add this one. I'll add actually 2 of those. We'll add a couple different cereals. Select. Okay, so now I've got some things in my shopping cart. I've got 1 Super Sugar Strike, I've got 2 Funny Farms milk, and I've got 1 Bessie brand 2% milk. Now, if I was to go back to IIS for this application pool that Eric created for me, the NetShow pool, and click on Recycle. Well, let me first go back to IE. You'll notice that we're running on process ID 4036 right now.
Right.
And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell this process, I'm just going to right-click on the process and tell it to recycle. So there's a recycle option when I right-click on here. So I'll tell it to recycle, and I'll go back to IE, and I'll hit F5 again. And what's going to happen, 2 things are going to happen. One is my shopping cart is going to be empty, and the second thing is I have a new process ID. So the default behavior of ASP.NET is that session state data, that's per user data that we can keep around, state for your application, is kept in process with ASP.NET. What we really want here is we want the app to recycle, but we want the session state data to persist and to stay around.
Right, and that's why the shopping cart at the top of the page then is empty, because the session state that was associated with the previous session, and when you recycle the session, it lost all that information.
Yep. If you're building an e-commerce site and someone's going to come in here and buy a couple items, last thing you want to have happen is to lose that sale because you had to recycle your app for some reason. So what we want to do is we want to come in, we're going to do a couple things actually. So first we're going to come to, or we're going to go to ASP.NET's web.config file for this application. In the web config file, I can specify some information, such as the settings for session state. So right now the mode is set to inproc. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say mode equals SQL Server. And what this is going to tell ASP.NET is that whenever it attempts to write or read from session state, rather than looking in memory, it's going to go try to talk to the SQL Server that's configured right here. So just so happens I'm running SQL Server local on my laptop. So I'll hit File, Save. And now a couple of things are going to happen. I'm going to hit F5 here. My app should continue to work, I believe. No, it's not going to work because it's already trying to take these items and store them in out-of-process session state. What's essentially happening is I have this shopping cart object, and it's trying to take this shopping cart object and serialize the object so I can push it into the SQL Server database. And the problem is that .NET is complaining and saying, I don't know how to serialize this shopping cart object you have. I don't know its type. I don't know if it's serializable. I can't serialize it. Here's my exception. So what we have to do is we have to go back into our code. So I'll find my market VB code where I have my, my order list class right here. So there's my order list class. And what I need to do is I need to add an attribute. So I'll add the attribute serializable. And this will essentially tell the common language runtime that this class can be serialized. So I need to add it onto order list, and I also need to add it onto order item because the order list contains order items. So again, we recompile the app. I should be able to refresh the page now. So the app's restarting, and it'll open the page back up, and it should allow me again to select items to add and remove from my shopping cart. There we go. So it just so happens I already have a shopping cart with some items in it. Let us clear the cart first. And let's come back in and go to the soda category, which we haven't been to yet, and add extreme orange and diet cola and this fizzy drink. Boy, I don't know who comes up with these names. And so again, what we want to look at here is I'm using the session state object. I'm storing my shopping cart in session state. Notice my process ID. Process ID 4052. Now I'm going to come back in to IIS, right-click on my app pool again, and say recycle. So recycle the app pool. So next
the last time we did this, it cleared the shopping cart out and lost it.
Right. The last time we did this, it did clear the shopping cart out. We lost everything. And so now I haven't hit refresh on the page yet. So we see our shopping cart. We see the process ID of 4052. And now I'll hit F5. And what should happen, the expected behavior here, is that yes, we do get a new process ID. So this is our way of knowing that yes, we are in fact running in a new process. And you'll notice our shopping cart is still available. And the reason our shopping cart is still available is because we persisted it inside of SQL Server. And now the process can come and go as it may, but when it comes back up, it knows to go talk to SQL Server and fetch the session data and pull it back out again.
Now, is that very expensive? I mean, I would think that doing an in-proc versus SQL Server, you'd have better efficiency out of in-proc.
There's definitely a trade-off. We see on average, about a 30% decrease in performance when you have to go out of process for session state. So you're paying taxes for taking your data and serializing it up. You're taking a tax for hopping on the network and going and talking to some other resource and storing it there. And then you're taking a tax on going and fetching it and deserializing it. So there's definitely some cost, but what you're doing is you're trading performance for reliability. And I guarantee you talk to anyone writing a large-scale shopping application, right? And you tell them that they can either have performance or they can guarantee that their shopping cart will stay around, and they'll take the shopping cart choice every single time.
Now, one thing that I'm also seeing here is that you're showing this on a single machine,
right?
And doing a recycle, which changes the process ID on it. let's say I took and had a farm, web farm out there, and from one page load to the next, I was round robining around just to make sure everything is properly loaded. And I wasn't staying on the same machine with this, but I was moving to a different machine, but it was still taking and storing the session state off in SQL Server. Could I have two different systems storing to the same SQL Server and thereby continuing the shopping cart?
Absolutely, you can move from machine to machine. So I can be in a server farm with 10 front-end machines, and they all know how to talk to a common state server behind the scenes. So no matter where I land in the server farm, I'm guaranteed to get my session data. Now, there's some additional things we're not talking about here, but you can optimize your pages for out-of-process session state. So you can come into your page and explicitly say, this page doesn't use session state, so never go pay the cost of going and fetching the session state data. This page only reads data, it never writes to it. So only read the data, never write it back out again. So there's some different ways you can tune the system to get really good performance out of it still.
Now, are there other ways that I could be storing the session state besides just in proc and SQL Server?
There is one other option called State Server, which is a Windows NT service that you can run. So you can, there's really just two out-of-process state options. There's SQL Server and there's this Windows NT State Service. We often find that customers are choosing to use the Windows NT State Service when they don't want to have their web servers necessarily tunnel through a firewall to get back to their database. So it provides a nice option that they can host in their DMZ that doesn't hold all their other important data for their system.
Now, is that a higher cost or lower cost than using SQL Server?
It turns out to be a wash, really. It turns out to be about the same performance from what we've seen. The only difference is that we actually now, we ship two different scripts for setting up SQL Server to support session state. One takes advantage of the temp DB database inside of SQL Server. Another one will actually create a persistent database. And the reason why we have those two, we have seen some different performance characteristics between the two depending on how many sessions are stored in there, because SQL can be really efficient about paging stuff out into memory. But we actually have those two now because we've had a lot of customers come back to us and say, I want not only to have it stored in SQL Server, but I want to set up SQL Server for replication or for failover. And when you're using TempDB, you can't do that. So we support that option too. And I think it might add a little bit of overhead, but I don't really have any specific numbers on that.
Okay. So if you're a programmer out in the audience that's watching the show now, and you got kind of excited about this, you're getting ready to install the beta of Windows NT Server 2003, or you're planning on installing the final versions be out any day now, whenever the show airs, and you're now wanting to sit down and starting writing code for IIS 6.0 and ASP.NET, what are the resources available to people?
There is an SDK that's coming out that targets many of the common things that we've been talking about today in greater detail. And that SDK is supposed to be coming out with the Windows 2003 Server SDK. There are resource guides. A resource guide is slated to be released. I believe the current date is 3 months post RTM. And the deployment guide, which is a big book about all the various different things to be aware of when you're deploying your applications on IIS 6. The deployment guide is slated for release on or around the same time as RTM, and that's going to be a great book for developers and architects who are really trying to know what they should be aware of when they deploy their applications on IIS 6. Many of the issues like recycling, like multi-instance issues that you may come up with during a recycle, things of that nature. A lot of the great details that we've kind of glossed over today, those will be covered in great detail in that book. Anything from how to come up with a reliability plan for setting goals for how reliable your application should be, testing the application using the various different features of IIS 6, and how to ensure that the application can work well with the new recycling and pinging and health detection features that we have. All that is contained within the deployment guide. Really recommend that people take a look at that. Okay,
that sounds good. Rob, do you have any?
So for ASP.NET, the first place that I would ask people to turn to is just the ASP.NET website. It's the website that our team runs, www.asp.net. I'll send you a pointer to that afterwards as well. We've got a forum system in there that has already an ASP.NET 1.1 forum. So if you have questions, it's a great place to start. Come in, ask some questions. There's a lot of people who'd love to help and really set people down the right road. We're going to have other resources as well, I believe, that talk more about some of the features that we have in ASP.NET 1.1, how to take advantage of them.
Now, being that we're still in the programmer segment here, and one thing we mentioned briefly in the architecture segment, was ISAPI applications and ISAPI filters, and we really didn't talk much more about it than that. I'm personally not seeing many people still doing ISAPI applications, ISAPI filters. Most people just doing ASP.NET pages, stuff like that. Is there still a need for doing ISAPI filters and applications? And if so, does IIS 6.0 bring anything to the table for them?
There's certainly a need for ISAPI. ISAPI is as close to the wire as you can get, right? So if you're looking for a way to develop rich, quickly developed applications that have a lot of power and functionality, ASP.NET's the way to go. If you're looking for complete and utter control over the entire request, ISAPI is basically the way that a lot of people go. And there are a lot of companies out there today that use ISAPI filters and extensions as a way of doing things like custom authentication, for example. Much more so before forms-based authentication was ever introduced by ASP.NET. That was basically the only way that customers had to do their own custom authentication. What the IIS team, or what basically I have seen is that there's still people out there developing ISAPI filters and extensions. We want to encourage people to move more towards ISAPI extensions. Filters are evil. Filters are evil because they are synchronous and because they operate on the IIS thread. The reason why ISAPI extensions are good in that regard is that they can have their own thread pool and they're asynchronous. So we've added a number of new server support functions, of which ASP.NET takes advantage of to get some of the benefits that we've talked about today, such as the ability to mark a response as cacheable within the http.sys cache. That's done via a new server support function called HSE request report or vector send. Then there's the ability to mark or report yourself as unhealthy, which we talked about before, and that's done via a new server support function called report unhealthy, right? There are other new server support functions that we've added to make the platform as a whole more beneficial for all developers, including ASP.NET. And one of the ways that we've allowed people to move away from filters is the ability to receive a request in an ISAPI extension and then modify that request and re-execute that request, skipping over yourself. So, for example, that filter that you had doing custom auth before, you could rewrite it as an ISAPI extension to intercept all requests and then change the URL, maybe append a cookie or do whatever you want to it, and then re-execute it and have ASP.NET, for example, pick it up as if it's the first time ASP.NET's ever seen the request. So we've added some new functionality to ISAPI to make that platform as a whole integrate better with IIS.
Okay, that sounds good. I mean, that's good information. I mean, like I said, it's very powerful to get into that. If you're going to be like an assembly language programmer, you want to be doing some ISAPI stuff, and you can be a C# programmer, you want to use ASP.NET.
Absolutely.
Well, any final words for the audience?
Really encourage you to use IIS 6. ASP.NET on IIS 6 is the best platform to develop your web applications, hands down.
And you wouldn't be biased, would you?
Not at all.
Yeah, no bias here whatsoever.
Well, thanks for joining me, Rob and Eric, and
Sure.
glad you could join us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So hopefully that gave you some insights of Windows Server 2003, specifically what IIS 6.0 and ASP.NET 1.1 provide to it. You can see we're very focused on security, robustness, scalability, making sure your applications run the best they possibly can. So take a look at these application capabilities and make your applications really great. Thanks for joining us.
For the last few years, Microsoft has been focused heavily on community efforts. And with me today is Catherine Feldhausen. She is a product manager in the Microsoft community team. Catherine, welcome.
Thanks, Erica.
So Catherine, why don't you tell us about the community team at Microsoft, just in general, what the efforts are about, and then tell us a little bit about what you do with that team.
Okay. So our team within Microsoft is actually quite small, the core team, I suppose you could say. But we actually have someone now in each of the product groups who are sort of designated community leads for that product. So someone in SQL, Exchange, Windows Server, and so it's been great in sort of just getting those people involved. So our role, or my role specifically, is to work with those product group people, getting them more involved and sort of saying where they can help and where they then can help their product team get involved. So that means participating in a news group, hosting an online chat, hosting a webcast, speaking at a user group, speaking at an event. So getting the product people at Microsoft, product folks, developers, testers, program management more involved, back out there facing the customer, rather than just developing a product sitting in sort of in their office and not touching customers, sort of understanding the needs of the customers. So hopefully we can enhance our products and meet the customer needs.
Have you seen some data or some customer feedback that the results have been very positive?
They have actually. When we first started off in the news groups, sort of 18 months, nearly 2 years ago, customers at first were a little bit hesitant to saying, "Hey, what are you doing out here?" And then realizing that we're just out here to help. And it was really quite positive. And people would come back and say, "Hey, thanks. Wow, I got my answer. My question answered, far quicker than I would have ever got it answered before." So it's just nice. We've got the knowledge. We produce the products, we create them. So just being out there helping the customers has been fun. It's actually really nice when you get that customer feedback saying thanks, and you're like, oh, it makes your day sort of brightens up.
So what do you specifically do in the team?
I do. So my role is to actually work with each of the product groups. So actually go and share best practices. So someone sitting in Windows Server will come up with a great idea of, hey, let's try this, and let's, from a user group perspective, instead of possibly having to always go to the user group, can we be on a conference call to help answer questions? Because we're never going to be out there at every single customer event everywhere around the world. To fly someone in to Australia or to Israel and Zimbabwe, we're not always going to be able to do that and meet the needs of the customer ourselves. So finding other little ways, being on a conference call, a VTC, visual telephone conference, or even a webcast. So they come up with these new ideas and innovative ideas, and I take them and share them with other product groups. So not just one little group sort of doing their own little thing, we sort of share ideas and then we all benefit.
So what did you do before this job at Microsoft?
I've been in quite a few different roles at Microsoft. I've been at Microsoft nearly 8 years. I joined actually first with Microsoft in Australia. I was based there, but I reported to someone actually here in Seattle, and which was an interesting, when you don't have your manager sort of right down the hall from you, was an interesting situation. So I was based there and I actually travelled around Australia, New Zealand, and then Southeast Asia. So Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia, and trained internal Microsoft staff on our internal products. So, helping us, how many sales do we make this week? So we have an internal application that enables us to, show that, and working with our distributors also in those countries and helping them provide data to those. So it was a great few years, and I had a great time traveling. So I then moved to Microsoft Redmond 5 years ago. So it's gone quite quickly, actually.
A long time.
It is, yeah. And sort of in different roles in that case. One of them was sort of continuing that role and actually expanding that role of working internal groups and Microsoft subsidiaries to most of the southern hemisphere. And then I actually moved over and worked for the help desk for a little while. Not for very long, but internal help desk, so helping Microsoft people installing systems there. Realised that my passion really wasn't with help desk at the time, so I changed jobs and went over into a tool we rolled out a tool internally, a customer relationship management system called Siebel. So I worked on that for a few years, and then worked for the customer and partner loyalty team. And that was a great year working with them, just realising that whatever we can do for our customers is the right thing. And my passion, I think, lies with the customers. So it's been great back doing that with the community effort.
So do you miss living and working in Australia?
No, watch out, I might cry. I do. I'm a little bit homesick at the moment, I think, because it's snowing here and I should be lying on a beach in Australia. I miss my family. I think that's the hardest thing. But fortunately, with the internet, you can actually be in contact with them quite often. So little things you just miss. Just the beaches. I lived in Bondi in Sydney, and I could go to the beach every day, and that was so I miss that. The beaches are a little bit different here, so
Certainly.
that's fun.
So what do you like to do outside of work?
Garden. It sort of sounds like an old-fashioned thing, but actually it's a great relaxation. I garden a fair bit. We're doing up our house, so spending a lot of time working on that in projects. I still love to travel. So whenever I can get the opportunity to travel somewhere within the US and see more of the US, we do. So my husband's sort of not used to sort of, why do we need to leave home? But I sort of, let's go see something new and exciting. And so I still travel a lot. I love to cook. I'm very fortunate that my husband does stay at home full time, so he generally does a lot more of the cooking than I do. But so whenever I can get the chance, I grab a new cookbook and try a new recipe. I do that.
That's great. Are there certain cuisines that you prefer over others?
Asian, and I don't know if that's because of my time traveling through South Pacific, but yeah, the Thai, Japanese sushi, those, but more the Thai, Indian. I just love food. I could eat all the time.
You said you like to go to the beaches in Australia. I was just thinking, did you ever get into snorkeling or scuba diving growing up there?
I did. Yeah, I actually I'm a certified diver, but I lived on a beach town where my parents lived, and so I'm actually a qualified surf lifesaver also. So when you have three brothers, you join them or you did something else. So I usually competed with them on the in the water. They usually surfed on shortboards, but I had longboards and would go in and paddle and surf with them as well. So,
Oh, that's great.
yeah, it was great.
Have you had a chance to dive here? And I'm
No,
sure
I haven't.
oh.
It's a bit too cold. I sort of haven't got into that yet.
I was going to say it's got to be
I've
world
been to
of
Hawaii,
difference.
but and snorkeled there, but I haven't dove here as yet. Something that's on my list, but just maybe I'd have to warm up a little bit before, but I do it.
So you said you like to travel also. Where's the next place you'd like to go to?
Oh, I have a list. I need to take my husband this time. So no, now that I have a husband, I was traveling with him. I'd like to go through Asia more so and take him through Asia. Europe's on our list eventually. We'd love to go to Italy. And one of the reasons for going to Italy, we both want to do a cooking course there and tasting the wines, of course. I've always wanted to travel down the Amazon. So I'd love to do that. I sort of spent a lot of time in Africa in '92, most of the year, actually 8 months of it, and travelled down the Zambezi and travelled down the Nile. And so the Amazon's sort of next on that list, but it may be off for 3 years. So.
That's great. Was this through Microsoft that you were in Africa?
No, I actually, I was based in London for 4 years and worked in the financial markets actually. So prior to Microsoft 8 years, I was in the financial markets for 7 years. And no, I was like most Australians, you'd end up in London at some stage, on walkabout as they call, and I ended up staying 4 years and averaged 5 months holiday a year. And decided one time that, I had enough of my job. I got a huge cash bonus, so I took off and went to Africa for 8 months and travelled all the way through from, actually ended up in Turkey and then travelled down to Egypt, and that's where I did my dive course. And then all the way ended up in South Africa. So had a wonderful time.
Wow.
Great experience.
Do you have a favorite country?
No, I don't actually. All countries are just different. The people of Zimbabwe are wonderful, and South Africa, and to sit in the game parks, phenomenal. In Tanzania, I sat with Maheshi out of gorillas in the mist before sadly he was poached. So, to sit within a 225 kilo, gorilla and sit within just the same distance that you and I are doing just the most amazing things. So, yeah, so there's nothing you're going to even say what was a favorite. I love to travel.
That sounds excellent.
Yeah.
So where do you see yourself and community at Microsoft going in the future?
I think continuing. I think the one thing that we shouldn't do is pull back, and we won't be doing that. It's just going to be part of the daily life of anyone at Microsoft is to connect with customers. And so we'll continue on. We've still got some work to do in that area, but I think it will continue over the next few years and continue on. And I think we've already started to see that. It was interesting. I was speaking to someone yesterday, and he was saying some new folks started, and they said, got them into and started into the news groups and doing chats, and they said, wow, so when they did their report out each month, it's just what I've been doing. And it was just part of they said, isn't this just normal? Doesn't everyone do this at Microsoft? And so I think we'll just continue on that. And so every new person who comes in does it, and every other person who's been at Microsoft will continue to do it. So we'll just continue on. I think we can improve, and I think we need to work with our customers and ask for their feedback and say, what are we doing right and what we're not doing right? And so we'll just continue to improve and make sure we're open to their acknowledgements and their feedback. So.
That sounds excellent. Well, Catherine, thanks for talking to me today.
Thanks, Erica. It was great to be here.
Well, that brings us to the end of another episode of the .NET Show.
And stay tuned for next month's episode, where we'll talk about practical implementations of application architecture.
And until then, we'll see you on the web.